You're listening to Quiet Horizons, a podcast of original science fiction stories written for the hours when the day is done. From here, there are no interruptions, just one complete story, beginning to end. Literary, unhurried, and best experienced with your eyes closed. Tonight's story begins now.
What the Lost Ship Sent. Part 1. The Work. The transmissions arrived slowly. This was the nature of the work. A ship lost in deep transit could take decades to send its final signals home, the radio waves moving at the only speed available to them, while the people who had sent them were already gone. Already by the time of sending, in whatever condition the void had left them. Sable Okafor had been receiving these transmissions for 11 years, and she had learned to hold the lag in mind the way you held time zones, as a structural fact of the geography rather than something to feel. The people on these ships were not waiting for her response. They were not waiting for anything. They had sent their words into the dark, and the words were still traveling, and it was her job to be here when they arrived. She worked at Meridian Station, which orbited Callisto at a distance calculated to minimize the interference from Jupiter's magnetosphere and maximize the station's exposure to the deep signal frequencies that incoming transmissions used. There were 6 people on the station at any given time, rotating in 2-year tours. Sable was in her 5th tour, which made her the station's longest-serving member by 3 years, and the closest thing it had to an institutional memory. Her title was Senior Archivist. Her work involved receiving, decoding, cataloging, and transmitting to the Earthside Meridian offices the final logs of colony ships that had been declared lost. Lost meant several things depending on context. Engine failure in deep transit, catastrophic navigation error, disease, structural compromise, occasionally things the transmissions described in language that was careful and functional and did not fully convey what she understood from reading between the lines of it. She had archived 340 ships in 11 years. She knew each one by its registry number and its last known position and the date its final transmission had arrived, the way a librarian knew her collection, not with personal attachment but with the particular intimacy of long, careful handling. She was 41 years old. She had come to this work by an indirect route through a doctorate in xenolinguistics that had not produced the alien signals she had expected to spend her career on, and through a series of subsequent positions that had moved her gradually outward from Earth until she was here, at the edge of the inhabited solar system, receiving the last words of the dead. She found the work satisfying in a way she did not often try to explain. People expected her to find it sad. Sometimes they asked at the beginning of her tours when new rotation members were still calibrating their relationship with her, whether it was hard, whether it wore on her, whether she thought about it when she was trying to sleep. She said it was not hard, which was true. She did not say it was the work she was meant for, because this was the kind of claim that required more vulnerability than she typically offered strangers. But she meant it. She was good at receiving. She was good at the careful, systematic, respectful handling of the final things people said. She understood that her function was archival rather than emotional. She was a librarian, not a mourner. But she also understood that the two were not entirely separate, that the act of receiving a thing, truly receiving it, had its own moral weight. Someone had to be here. Someone had to be listening when the words arrived. She was here. She was listening. This had been enough for 11 years. The transmission from the Ananya Krishnan arrived on a Thursday in March. She almost missed the designation. She was working through a backlog of signal fragments from the previous week, doing the initial triage that preceded full decoding, and the registry number came up in her queue embedded in the metadata of a weak signal she had tagged as low priority based on its signal strength. She was running the standard pre-decode filters when the number resolved, and she looked at it and something in her went very still. A K2031-17, Colonial Transport Vessel, Ananya Krishnan, departed, March 2031. Declared lost, September 2034. Crew, 340. Colonist Manifest, 1,847. Total aboard, 2,187. And she sat at her console and looked at the number. The Ananya Krishnan had been lost before she was born. It had departed for the Proxima Centauri system in 2031 on what had been, at the time, the most ambitious colonial transit ever attempted. Not the first deep colony ship, but the largest, crewed by the best qualified personnel the Colonial Authority had assembled, carrying nearly 2,000 colonists who had passed through years of selection and training, and who had understood, or believed they understood, what they were choosing. She had been told about the Ananya Krishnan in the way children were told about things that were true and hard and too large to be held comfortably. She had been told about it once in the way of information that was given rather than discussed, and she had not asked follow-up questions because she had understood, in the wordless way of children with one parent, that follow-up questions were not what was needed. Her mother had been on the Ananya Krishnan. She sat at the console for 11 minutes without doing anything. This was, she understood, the first time in 11 years of this work that she had sat still at a console without doing anything. She was not a person who sat still at consoles. She was a person who processed, cataloged, moved forward through the queue. She sat still. After 11 minutes, she got up and went to the station's small observation window. A porthole, really, not the dramatic transparency of the ships and stories, and looked out at Callisto's surface and Jupiter's vast pale curve beyond it. She had looked at this view enough times that it was furniture. Today it was not furniture. Today it was outside, which was what it actually was. The real outside, 400 million miles from Earth and several decades of travel time from a ship that was lost, and the transmission of which had been traveling through the dark toward her for 41 years. 41 years. She was 41 years old. She thought, someone on that ship sent this transmission at approximately the moment I was being born. She thought, I don't know if that is meaningful. She thought, I am going to have to decide how to handle this. Part 2, Protocol. The Meridian protocols were clear about conflict of interest. She had helped write some of them. In her third tour, she had been appointed to the Protocol Review Committee, a rotating body that met once a year via time-delayed conference with the Earthside offices. And she had contributed language to the section on personal connections because it had not previously been specific enough, because there had been a case in her second tour in which a colleague had received a transmission from a ship on which a friend had been aboard and had processed it without disclosure, which was not a violation of any written policy, but which had felt to Sable like a failure of the spirit of the work. The protocols said, in the event that an archivist has or becomes aware of a personal connection to the crew or colonist manifest of a received transmission, the archivist shall disclose this connection to the station director and recuse from processing, passing the transmission to another qualified archivist for handling. The station director was a man named Vikram Osi, on his second tour, a methodical, Ghanaian British engineer who had come to archival work through communication systems rather than linguistics, and who respected Sable in the way that competent people respected other competent people with different skill sets. He was a reasonable man. He would handle the disclosure without drama. She would tell him this morning. She would pass the transmission to Hana, who was the next most qualified decoder on the current rotation. The Ananya Krishnan's final logs would be decoded and cataloged and transmitted to the Earthside offices, where they would join the archive of 340 other lost ships, which meant they would be available to researchers and historians and the families of those aboard, those families still surviving 41 years later. And the work would be done correctly and completely, and she would have done the right thing. She sat at the observation window and looked at Jupiter. She thought about the protocols for a while longer. Then she went back to her console. What she did was not a violation of the protocols. She was precise about this in her own mind, and she was the person who had written the relevant language, so she felt qualified to interpret it. The protocols required recusal from processing. They did not require her to look away from the metadata that was already in her queue, already decoded by the automated systems, already part of the station's received data. The metadata was not the transmission. The metadata was the envelope. The Ananya Krishnan's metadata told her the following. Total transmissions received, 1. This was standard. Ships in extremis typically sent one consolidated final burst, rather than a series, to conserve power. Date of transmission from source, April 14, 2031, 13 days after departure. Date of transmission receipt at Meridian, March 11, 2073, 42 years in transit. Transmission type, multi-format, audio, text, visual, and what the metadata classified as compound personal, which was the technical designation for individual messages encoded within the larger ship transmission. Personal messages from crew and colonists intended for specific recipients on Earth. Number of compound personal files, 1,847. She looked at the number for a while, 1,847, one for each colonist. They had all sent something home in the 13 days between departure and whatever had happened, and the somethings had been traveling for 42 years, and they were here now. One of them was from her mother. She was certain of this the way she was certain of the orbital mechanics of Callisto, not from feeling, but from the available data. Her mother had sent a message home. Her mother had, in the 13 days between departure and the event that had ended the Ananya Krishnan, composed something and encoded it in the ship's transmission, and aimed it at Earth and sent it into the dark. It had traveled 42 years. It had arrived last Thursday in Sable's queue, tagged as low priority on account of weak signal. She went to tell Vikram. He was in the commissary with a coffee and a report on the recent antenna recalibration. He looked up when she came in and read her face with the immediate competence of a person who was good at people. "Sit down," he said. She sat. She told him. She was clear and complete and did not editorialize. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The full processing goes to Hana," he said. "That's not a question." "I know." "Are you all right?" "I don't know yet." She said this without qualification because Vikram was someone who could receive it. "I would like to request access to the compound personal file associated with my mother's colonist number. After Hana has completed processing and cleared the files for archivist review. That is within normal protocol for family members." He looked at her steadily. "You're a family member?" "Yes." "You're also the senior archivist who received the transmission." "I'm aware that those are in tension." She kept her hands flat on the table. "I want to do this correctly. Hana processes. I recuse completely from the ship's logs and the archival documentation. When the compound personal files are cleared for family access, I access my mother's file as a family member, not as an archivist." Vikram was quiet for a moment. "That's clean," he said. "That's actually clean." "I wrote the protocols," she said. "I know you did." He picked up his coffee. "Take some time today if you need it." "I don't need time," she said, and meant it, and went back to work. Part 3. The Waiting. Hana processed the Ananya Krishnan in 3 weeks. This was faster than the average. Hana was meticulous but efficient, and she understood, without Sable having said anything directly about her reasons for recusal, that speed was a form of consideration. She cleared the archival documentation first, which was standard, and transmitted it to the Earthside offices, and received the standard acknowledgement. Then she cleared the compound personal files for family access, and flagged Sable's terminal with a simple note: "Done." During those 3 weeks, Sable worked. She processed 5 other transmissions from the queue: a small cargo vessel that had been lost near the asteroid belt, a research ship that had suffered structural failure in the outer system, 3 smaller craft whose final logs were brief and technical and told a story that was completed in a paragraph. She cataloged them with the same care she gave everything. She ate her meals and did her exercise rotation and slept adequately. She did not think about the Ananya Krishnan more than was unavoidable. What was unavoidable was mostly at night, in the particular quiet of the station between shifts, when the ambient sound of the systems dropped, and the dark outside the porthole pressed closer. She had not spoken to her father about this, had not communicated with Earthside since the transmission arrived, because she did not know how to do it, because her father was 80 years old, and the loss of the Ananya Krishnan was something he had processed in his own way across 41 years, and she did not know if being told that a transmission had arrived would help or harm, and she did not want to decide that before she had read what it said. She had thought, in the early years of this work, about the families of the people whose ships she archived. She had thought about them abstractly, the grief, the particular complicated grief of a loss that had no body, no sight, no visible aftermath, just absence, and then eventually the official documentation that the absence was permanent. She had been one of these families, technically, for most of her life. She had not found it useful to think about herself in that category. The useful thing had been to come here and do the work, to be the person on the other end of the signal, and she had done that for 11 years, without the two things touching. They were touching now. She lay in her bunk and thought about her mother, which was not something she did often, and which was, when she did it, an act of significant reconstruction. She had been born 2 months after the Ananya Krishnan's departure, conceived just before her mother's final selection for the Colonial Manifest, a fact whose implications she had understood differently at different ages, and had arrived by 41 at a settled, if incomplete, peace with. Her mother had known she was pregnant when she left. Her mother had made the choice that she had made for reasons Sable did not have access to, and had been careful, her father said, not to frame as abandonment. She was going ahead. She was going to make something. There had been a plan, vague and optimistic as the plans of 2031 had been, for the colony to be established and communications infrastructure to be built, and a future to be assembled in which the daughter born after her mother's departure would grow up in a world that had somewhere to go. The Ananya Krishnan had been lost 13 days out. There was no colony, there was no future of that shape. There was only Earth and Sable's father, who had raised her well, and never pretended the situation was other than it was, and the particular shape of an absence that she had learned to carry the way her father had learned to carry it, which was to not put it down and to not hold it up, and to simply have it as a fact of the architecture of herself. She lay in her bunk and thought about what her mother had sent. Part 4. The Message. She opened the file on a Sunday. She had chosen Sunday deliberately, not for any religious reason, but because Sunday was the station's low operations day, the shift rotation quieter, Vikram and Hana in their own quarters, or the commissary, no expectation of her presence anywhere. She sat at her personal terminal rather than the archival console. This was family access, not archival work, and she wanted the distinction to be physical as well as procedural. Her mother's colonist number was on file. She typed it in. The compound personal file contained two things. This surprised her. She had expected one. The metadata flagged them as audio, duration, 417, and text document, 847 words. She opened the text document first. It began without salutation. The handwriting, it had been dictated and then auto-transcribed, and the transcription retained the rhythms of spoken prose, was direct and slightly formal, the voice of a scientist accustomed to writing reports and not entirely at ease with other registers. I am writing this on day 11. We are past the point of any realistic return, though I think we all knew by day 3 that we were not going back. I am not writing this to say goodbye. I have been telling myself this since I began, and I will continue to believe it, because goodbye is a door, and I don't have a door to give you. What I have is this. I want to tell you some things that your father will tell you better, but I want to tell you in my own voice so you have the shape of it. You will not know my voice when you hear this. I know that. I have tried to make peace with that fact, and I will not pretend I have entirely succeeded. Your name is Sable. I chose it because I was reading about astronomical nomenclature when I found out I was pregnant, which is consistent with who I am, and also because the word means both darkness and black-furred and the color of the deep sky, and I wanted you to have a name that was multiple things at once. I don't know if this was a good reason for a name. It felt right. Your father's the best person I know. I mean this with full awareness that I have known a great many people and have professional experience assessing the capacities of human beings under various conditions. He is patient in the specific way that matters, which is not passivity, but the willingness to remain present with difficult things until they resolve, which many people cannot do. You will be in good hands. You are in good hands. I went ahead because I believed in it. I still believe in it. This mission is the right direction for our species, and it is not arrogance to believe that. It is the conclusion I reached through my work and through decades of observation of what we are and what we need. We are a people that must have somewhere to go. We close in on ourselves when we don't. I believe this. Going ahead was consistent with believing it. I want you to know that I also knew what I was choosing. I don't mean I made the choice lightly. I mean I understood its dimensions. I understood that you would grow up without me. I understood that this was a harm to you that I was choosing to inflict, and I do not have language that resolves this, and I'm not going to try to find language that makes it comfortable. It is what it is. You deserved better, and I chose this anyway, because I believed the mission was worth the cost, and the cost was not mine alone to pay. You paid it too without being asked. I am sorry for that. Not the going. I cannot be sorry for the going. It was right, and I know it was right. But the cost to you, I am sorry for the cost to you. What I want you to know, most of all, is this. You are wanted. Whatever the choosing of the mission implies about my priorities, it does not imply anything about whether you are wanted. I am going to make something out here that will eventually have a place in it for you. That is the plan. That is what I believe. I am holding that belief in both hands on day 11, which is as much as I can do, and I am sending it to you, and I hope it arrives. Your father will know when to give you this. I trust him to know. I love you. I do not know what that means to you at the age when you read this. I hope it means something. I hope it is not too late for it to mean something. Go ahead. Whatever is in front of you, go ahead. That is the only direction that works. Monsieur Sable sat with the document for a long time. The station moved in its orbit. Jupiter's light shifted slightly against the porthole as Callisto completed its slow rotation. Somewhere in the station, the water recycler cycled with its characteristic low pulse. The document was 847 words, and she had read it twice, and she did not move. Her mother had the voice of a scientist. She had known this abstractly. Her mother had been a xenobiologist, the lead life sciences officer on the Ananya Krishnan, chosen for her expertise in biosystem adaptation and her ability to function under extreme stress. She had known this the way she knew her mother's physical description from photographs. Dark, precise, slightly impatient in the eyes. She had not known the voice. She knew it now. It was her voice, the directness of it, the discomfort with the emotional register, the reaching toward it anyway, the refusal to soften what was hard, the apology without mitigation. She recognized these as her own habits, had always assumed them to be her father's influence, and now found them doubled back in the source, the precise wavelength of them recognizable the way a signal was recognizable when you had spent years learning its frequency. She had been found by her own signal. She sat for a while longer, then she opened the audio file. It was 4 minutes and 17 seconds of her mother's voice. She did not speak in the audio file. She read the letter. Sable had the text in front of her, and she read along while she listened. The words familiar now, their shape established, but the voice underneath them new and complete and entirely devastatingly real. Her mother had a slight Ghanaian British accent. Her family had been from Accra, had been in London for a generation before the colonial programs, and a precise consonant quality that was the speech of someone who had learned English formally and then made it her own. She spoke at a measured pace, not slow, not rushed. She paused in the places that required pauses. She did not cry, or if she cried, she did not do it during the recording, but her voice at the sentence "you paid it too," without being asked, had a quality that Sable could not name, but which she recognized from the inside, from the experience of speaking through the presence of a thing you were not going to cry about because crying about it would not help. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Sable sat with the recording running after it ended, the silence of it, the empty file. She sat with it for a while, and then she closed her personal terminal and sat in the quiet of her quarters and looked at the porthole. Part 5. Signal. She called her father that evening, earlier than their usual time. The signal delay from Callisto to Earth was currently 38 minutes each way, which meant a conversation was really an exchange of short films, each one a response to the last, each one arriving out of sync with the immediate interior experience of the sender. She told him a transmission had arrived from the Ananya Krishnan. She said, "There is a message from her. I can forward it to you if you want it. I can also tell you what it says, if that's easier. I will follow your lead." She sent the message and waited 76 minutes. Then, when his response came, he was sitting in the kitchen of their house in Lagos. She recognized the chair, the window behind it, the particular quality of the West African evening light. He was 80 years old and he looked it, but his eyes were the same eyes, the patient eyes. He said, "I would like to hear what it says, from you in your words first, and then yes, the recording. I have been waiting a long time." She looked at the recording of him for a moment, then she began composing her reply. She said she was sorry for the cost. She said you were the best person she knew. She said you would know when to give it to me, and she trusted you to know, and you did. You brought me here, you raised someone who would be in this exact seat when this arrived, which I think is as close to knowing as it gets. She said she loved us. She said to go ahead, whatever was in front of us. She said, "Go ahead. It's the only direction that works." She paused the recording and sat with the unsent message for a moment. Outside, Jupiter turned its ancient face. Callisto moved beneath her in the slow way of moons. 400 million miles of dark stretched outward in every direction. The ordinary immensity of the place she had chosen to work, the place where the signals arrived. She thought about the Ananya Krishnan and its 2,187 people, gone 13 days into a journey they had believed in. She thought about all 340 ships in her archive, their final words received and catalogued and held. She thought about what it meant to spend 11 years being present for the end of things, and whether she had understood until now what it cost. She had understood the cost abstractly. She had been living it. She thought about her mother in the 13th day out, past the point of return, writing a letter to a daughter she would never meet on a ship, going towards something she believed in, sending it into the dark at the speed of light and trusting the dark to hold it until someone was ready. The dark had held it. 42 years. It had arrived correctly. She finished the message to her father. She attached the audio file. She sent it. Then she sat at her personal terminal and played the audio file one more time, not because she needed to. She had memorized it by now, the 847 words and their rhythm, the slight Ghanaian lilt and the precise consonants, and the pause at the hard places, but because it was 4 minutes and 17 seconds of a voice that had traveled 42 years through the dark to reach her, and she thought it deserved to be heard twice. Her mother's voice said, "Go ahead. That is the only direction that works." Sable sat in the quiet after it ended and thought, "I know, I have been." And then she went back to work, to the cue and the frequencies and the long patient labor of being here when the signals arrived, because this was what she did, and she was the right person to do it, and the ships were still sending, and someone had to listen. End. As we reach the end of tonight's journey, I hope these quiet horizons have brought you a deep sense of peace and calm. Let your body grow heavy, your breathing slow and steady, and your mind drift gently into rest. Good night, dear listener. Sleep well, and I'll see you again on the next horizon.